to EUACI for supporting this initiative and having this wrap-up event just less than 10 days ahead of a very important decision when European Council will consider the next step of enlargement and will assess our overall progress in rule of law and fight against corruption reforms. I find our country in a particularly good shape at this moment of time. We have a fully capable anti-corruption infrastructure, both when it comes to prevention and fight against corruption. It's also seen by a very fascinating first row of the seaters of today's panel, from Parliament to law enforcement and APC newly elected head. So, the logic of having this discussion today is to sum up the first results of functioning of this anti-corruption infrastructure, as the major line of assessment of our partners would be the track record, the enforcement of legislation, the enforcement of mandates of the anti-corruption institutions and the judicial sector in that regard. So I'm really happy to hear a lot of positive feedbacks already. I hope this discussion would have as much visibility as possible, and it's very important for us at this point of time that we all have the same understanding that politically we have done a lot of job to set the proper framework, that the institutional and enforcement functions to be implemented in a proper way. So it's now for all the institutional setting to show the results, to meet the highest standards of investigation and the outcomes of this investigation. So I'm really looking forward for the discussion today. I'm really grateful to our partners and really happy to see the key foreign colleagues over these meetings, including those experts who are working with us on a daily basis, the civil society. This is basically the major framework of the future negotiation teams, which will be included into the negotiation process. So thank you so much for coming in person, for readiness to share the results and the plans, and for making sure that we will have a decision just in less than 10 days for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. You may take a seat for your next panel, and I would like to invite to the floor the head of the EUACI, Alan Pach Christensen.
Do you hear me? Yes. Deputy Prime Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to welcome you to our event today. We are happy to see so many here with us at the Generator Hub in Kyiv, and we also know that there are quite a number of people that are watching us online. Welcome to all of you. This is indeed a very pertinent topic we are going to discuss today. As the Deputy Prime Minister mentioned, we expect an important decision by the European Union deciding on the negotiation framework for Ukraine. And the topic of today's event is anti-corruption seen in the context of EU integration. We hope to get some answers to questions like what will the opening of negotiations mean for the work on anti-corruption? What are the demands that we can expect that will come from the European Union? And I'm really pleased that we have the EU Ambassador Katarina Matsanova with us today to provide the perspective of the European Union. During these months, we have seen very important progress in the fight against corruption. On all the parameters that we follow as an anti-corruption program, we see progress. And that's despite the difficult context in which our partners are working. Ukraine is fighting a war, and at the same time, Ukraine is showing some of the best results ever in fighting corruption. We see very important progress on legislation, on the investigation of high-level cases by NABU and SAPO. We see good progress when it comes to the number of verdicts of the High Anti-Corruption Court. We see progress in the implementation of the state anti-corruption program. And recently we saw very significant progress on the corruption perception index. Ukraine had the best score ever and is now on an equal footing with some other EU candidate countries. You will hear more about these developments later today. I'm happy that we have the heads of the anti-corruption institutions with us, who will tell about their results. And I can say from our daily cooperation with these institutions that we are very impressed by all the good work they're doing. Of course, there will always be more to be done, and I would also mention the concern we have as to some recent incidents with the harassment of some of our media partners. But it shouldn't underestimate the very important progress that Ukraine is achieving these months. Just a few weeks ago, we had an event where the Deputy Prime Minister provided a video address talking about anti-corruption in terms of the transformation of the society. And I think this transformative agenda will be a very important one for Ukraine in the coming years. You cannot eradicate corruption by legislation and punishment alone. There will need to be more focus, I believe, on the preventive work, on mainstreaming anti-corruption across sectors, and perhaps also in reaching out to the ordinary Ukrainians so that they can feel in their daily lives that the fight against corruption has an impact. A key actor here is the NACP, the National Agency for Corruption Prevention, and we are so pleased that we have the new head of the NACP with us today, Mr. Palushuk. Congratulations on your appointment. And we can assure you that there will be a lot of work for you and your staff in the coming months and years. Today, the tolerance of corruption in Ukraine is lower than ever. Ukrainians want to create an even better society. They want to get away from the corrupt practices of the past. I think us living in Ukraine, we can feel that there's this new narrative out there, this change of mentality. We can also see it in our surveys. It's a fact. And I think it gives hope that Ukraine will succeed in its transformation and its fight against corruption. And with these few words, I will just wish you an interesting and fruitful seminar today, and thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. And we are now moving to the first panel of our discussion. And I'm sure that among this group of friends and colleagues, our panelists do not need an introduction. But still, I would like to invite to the panel Ambassador of European Union to Ukraine, Katarina Maternova. Please welcome. Our next panelist is Olga Stefanishina, Deputy Prime Minister. Andriy Kostin, Prosecutor General of Ukraine. And Anastasia Radina, Chairwoman of the Parliamentary Committee on Anti-Corruption Policy. For those of you who read the agenda, it will not be a surprise what we're going to discuss today, but I think there is still a lot of questions left what Ukraine have to do to become a member of European Union and first and foremost fight the narrative of being one of the most corrupted European countries. This narrative being spread and strengthened by Russian propaganda quite often is being used every day also in the German media, in the French media, to pass the message to the European people that Ukrainians are too corrupt to be a part of the European society. But I recall in the very beginning, right after the Russian invasion, I was also moderating the panel with Ambassador, and I remember very well your phrase that if Ukraine would be endemically corrupt, as it being oftenly portrayed, it would fall right after the Russian invasion. And that's only because of rule of law and the strong institution that we have, we also managed to be stronger in this fight and in our resistance. And my question to you, if I would like to ask you to start this conversation today, would you still think that the level of corruption is exaggerated? And what could be potentially change the perception of Ukraine abroad? Is it an article in the news, in the Brussels news, or the achievement or activity that you could imagine that would help to change this perception?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks a lot to Alan and the Danish government to be our excellent partners on this in this program. I think we are now about to enter phase 3 of the EUACI program that we have been funding, and I think was in fact part of all the anti-corruption developments in Ukraine for many, many years. And so I will start from the end and announce that on the 16th of April, probably in the afternoon, we are going to have a big event of 2 projects that are entering new phases and that have been, I think, very instrumental in supporting Ukraine in the reform of the entire rule of law system. That's EUACI with the Danish government, so it's an EU-Denmark cooperation, and the Pravo Justice Projects, which is a program that is co-sponsored by France and the European Union, and we will have a joint big kickoff, so we're going to mark your agenda and many of your agendas, because I think this is an incredibly important topic to discuss. So I'm very glad that we can talk about the anti-corruption side already here. Yes, I have been very vocal about the Russian narratives, and Russia, in fact, very skillfully planting for well over a decade the narrative that Ukraine is so corrupt, it's practically a failed state, despite the changes that have been happening. Indeed, if Ukraine was as corrupt as the narrative goes, we would not be here 2 years into the 3rd year of the war. So I stand behind that, but let's also acknowledge that the path of Ukraine after the fall of communism has been one of the corruption being the system, and of entrenched oligarchic interests, of captured state by the various interests. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not, the Russians don't invent reality. They add to, they enhance, they amplify grievances. But they had something to build on, because there was 20 years of a systemically corrupt regime after regime, right? State that's well documented. I'm not saying anything surprising. After Maidan, there has been the political will, first of all. Second, huge push by the very, very strong Ukraine civil society, and pushed by the international community, the donor community, to change that. And the fact that it has changed, even something as elusive as perception index by Transparency International, since Maidan has shown progress by 11 steps, and last year by 3 steps. So there has been progress. Sometimes there was regress, and progress is never a linear progression. But there has certainly been a substantial progress, and I think both Olga and Alan mentioned it actually accelerated in the time of war, and that may be surprising to some. In fact, the war has had liberalizing impact on this country, and there is the opinion poll after opinion poll show it. But prior to the full-scale invasion, corruption never featured among the top 5 concerns of the population. It was somewhere there in the top 10, but never number 1, 2, 3. And now, systematically, it's number 2. It's the second concern after security. And this creates the pressure. And this shows that the values of the populations have shifted. There has been a paradigmatic shift in the population. And nowhere better to see than last week. He was one of the nicest things I've been to since I moved to Kyiv. We had this essay competition for young Ukrainians on what Maidan meant and what European values meant for the path of Ukraine. And there were 18-year-olds. There was a 16-year-old girl among the finalists. And the clarity of purpose and the clarity of understanding where they belong was really amazing to watch. You know, there is a whole new generation growing up Ukraine, despite the war, that doesn't want to have the Ukraine of the past. Now you're asking how to make it known. I think events like this, talking. I think what my colleagues in Brussels are trying to do is really give an objective picture of the reality, because is there no corruption in Ukraine? Absolutely not. Of course there is corruption in Ukraine, but there are now institutions dealing with it. It's now considered, according to the opinion poll after opinion poll, it is seen as a crime. It is seen as an aberration. It's no longer the system. And I think one just needs to be telling the stories, and one needs to very much support the institutions. And it's not only the 4 anti-corruption institutions, it's the whole law enforcement. And this is one of the weaknesses we can talk about. It's most of corruption is not done through the 4 institutions. That's just the top level, which is extremely important. But there is a whole second layer of corruption cases that need to be addressed. So systematic work on meting out corruption as a crime, and continuing the great job. And so I don't think that there is a silver bullet on how to change perceptions, but I think that there is more understanding now, and we just need to be telling, you need to be telling the story, and we need to be helping you to tell the story.
I think it's a very strong message that, of course, there is a perception, but there is also a lot of work that Ukraine has still to do on the top level and also on the ground level, that we will talk further with our other panelists. But if I may ask you one more question, because I know that everybody in this room is waiting for European Summit, maybe even more than for the Oscar night. And everybody is wondering what will be the decisions or insights or further recommendations. So, of course, I know that you're limited in your role to disclose, but maybe some hints or insights on the process of what to expect next week for Ukraine and for all of this waiting in the room.
This week, Katarina.
Well, first, let me congratulate first Mr. Chernov, but all of Ukraine for the Oscar. And I also take his words that you would, of course, be much better off without the war and without the Oscar. But getting the Oscar is again, a recognition that this war matters and is visible, and it's a terrible way of doing it, but all these things matter. This is how perceptions get changed, and I would make it a must-see movie for anyone who deals with Ukraine. Indeed, this week there are going to be decisions by the European Commission, the executive of the EU, both in terms of assessing the 4 steps that have been outlined, and there is going to be an oral update to the meeting of the ambassadors of EU member states in Brussels. That's the format, and also hopefully adoption of the negotiating framework. Now, the negotiating framework is the mandate that the Commission gets from member states as a position paper, essentially, on the discussions with Ukraine on accession. And it will be adopted by the Commission, but then the next important step, and that's what Olga was speaking about, is for the member states to consider it, and they have to adopt it because they give the mandate to the Commission. So the first important step will be the Commission adoption, and unless something goes wrong, that should happen this week. The process is ongoing, and then the Belgian presidency will take over and will present it to the Council. And what the timing of that is going to be is difficult for me to speculate on. So that's what's going to happen. But just to explain why the EU is so closely looking at this agenda, very briefly, and it's encapsulated in this chapter 23-24. That's what you may be hearing in the next month and years to come. When the EU was created, it was developed, prosperous, democratic countries that got together and transferred to the EU level certain powers and certain legislative agendas, and created this famous acquis communautaire, the group of norms and laws that bind the EU together. And those were very, very specific sectoral issues where the initially 6 and then 9 and then 12 member states and then 15, now 27, and then 28 and then 27, agreed to work on together. And this set of norms has been growing exponentially over the last few years because the way the EU deals with it, and anytime there's a crisis, an agreement to do something like after COVID, there is now a lot of medical acquis. The member states work on it together. What we don't have acquis on are the fundamentals. Are the fundamentals of democracy. Do you have one cameral parliament or do you have two? Are you a centralized country or are you decentralized? To which level? Are the elections with only proportional representation also not? So all of these issues, none of them are part of the acquis because the countries were at the level of development where this was already done when the EU was created. And this posed a bind because when it was only a sectoral issue, the countries could adopt the acquis, join the EU, and they functioned. This was the last enlargement of Austria and Sweden and Finland. And then came the enlargement with post-communist countries that came from a completely different system. And at that time, you know, the mother of all mistakes, you know, you all have to have independent judiciary. So we made independent judiciaries before we reformed them. And so suddenly the countries came in and there was a recognition that institutionally, and especially in these areas, there is something missing. The system is not working. And that's how these chapters 23, 24 became much more robust and much more difficult to go through, and the Commission and the EU as a whole learned that you actually need to look at things like corruption, like organization of a judiciary, the process, and the rights of the accused, etc. So this is something that's been building into it, and it's going to be closely followed. And it's going to be closely followed also because of what happened in the existing member states after accession. So it is bad news, but it's news that yes, the bar is higher because of the recognition that you actually need to have the engine of the democracy and the engine of the state working, and not only adopt individual sectoral pieces of legislation to be able to function in the EU. So this is an issue that will be under regular, not only close scrutiny, but regular scrutiny throughout the accession process.
Thank Ambassador, for your intervention, and for also to the colleagues from EU supporting the project like the EU ACI and Pravo Justice. It's been already 10 years that the projects like ours existed in Ukraine and helped to pave the way and support the institutions that you were talking about. And now we will move on to our next panelist, Olga Stefanishina. And I know the question that you're all waiting is about the Mrs. Olga's assessment of the Ukrainian government perception of the next decision that will be made. But like in Oscars, I would like to just create a bit of suspension and wait a bit and start with more simple questions. I know that you are like our key negotiator and you meet regularly. Even just before this event, you had a short call with our diplomatic partners. And I'm just curious how often they raise the question of corruption in Ukraine in the framework of negotiations and EU accession.
Thank you so much. I'll probably try to put it this way. As many times referred over today, we're talking about not almost a 10-year period of transformation, which has been inspired by the Revolution of Dignity and European Maidan. And it has been perfectly clear what has to be done because all the scope and the scale of corruption has been revealed with the fall of then President Yanukovych failure to perform as a president. So there was a clarity that the scale of wasted interest is so huge that there is a necessity to establish a separate anti-corruption framework at all levels. So, and it has taken us 10 years to complete this process and make these institutions fully operable. And at the same time, regardless all of these efforts in parallel, all the public data has been open. We do not remember probably that 10 years ago this was a huge source of corruption. Public procurement has become transparent. This has been 30 years of the corruption process, and now we have all the things which were called the petty corruption in application on our iPhone. So the situation is very, very different from what was 10 years ago. But at the same time, the narratives are almost the same from country to country, and we understand that the major necessity is not to fight against the narratives, but also to help our partners and friends who are the decision makers not to fall within these narratives. So, and as was referred to date, it's France, Germany, and Denmark who are the key partners supporting the efforts in reforms in these sectors. These are the countries which has been accumulating years of expertise and knowledge. And these countries are impossibly to be driven by the narratives of the radical or populistic groups who speculate Ukraine and this topic ahead of important decisions just to drain more resources from European budget or whatever. I think that Ukraine is a very politically educated nation and we know what we're talking about. So it's very important to build the resilience against disinformation and the narratives. And I want to correct a bit, Katka. Yes, there is a corruption in Ukraine. There is a corruption everywhere. We have been watching closely and monitoring the very public cases of detention and prosecution and conviction of different officials in Ukraine, but we have been also following the investigations of a number of prime ministers in European capitals, the high-level officials in European Parliament, and the CEOs of the public enterprises across all many European countries. So it's not a unique case. The corruption is everywhere. So I think that the major thing is to build the resilience, raise the awareness, but also to see, not to be blind towards our own accomplishments. We have gone through a huge way. We have gone through a huge process. We can even export our expertise and the knowledge. At the same time, we have been always putting a high rank to ourselves. And probably at this point of time, as the accession process starts and ends with the assessment of the reforms in the democratic institutions functioning, in the rule of law, the functioning institutions in different areas, now the demand is not to establish institutions, not to make them functional, but to make them effective. And it's the development, the vision which is now not very much lies within the hands of political decision makers. It's about enforcement. So the key answer on my side is that we have built a very strong networks of supporters among key EU countries who hold this, front of resilience and knowledge, which forms the unwavering bond of support of Ukraine. And that's why for us it's much easier not to see the countries and the partners falling into this false narratives and knowledge. But at the same time, we understand that there is a huge decade ahead of us of development, transformation, and assessment. And now, at this point of time, we might seem to see ourselves in a complicated situation where we're trying to strive throughout the war. We are coping with our domestic issues and trying to seek consensus in that regard. But basically, I'm the key negotiator. I negotiate on everything, on agriculture, on transport, on energy, on anti-corruption, so on whatever. And basically, all our law enforcement and judicial sector would also be part of the broader market, of a broader competition. And we also have to be able to fit to that. Because today, we are assessed as a country, but just in a couple of years, we'll be assessed in a broader framework. So we have to evolve to extent to be able to competitive and all European political market as well.
You mentioned that it's still a decade ahead of us, and I remember that last year the Ukrainian government was a bit more positive, naming 2-3 years for the accession pass. What is now your expectation about, first of all, decision of Commission this week, and the length of the pass that it will take us to get to EU?
Well, my assessment is the same. I keep the promises I make is 2 years. 2 years for ourselves to do our homework. But the reforms do not end with the accession. It's only the beginning. We were working hard to make a decision to start the accession talks, but in reality, it's just 100 times more job we have to do. So we thought that we were going through a tough process, seeking for the hard consensus and decisions, and this was mostly for Ukrainian parliament. And now they are all, laughing at me, saying that, oh, this was not hard, and we thought this was the harder part. It was just the beginning. So membership is just the beginning. So 2 years, it's absolutely period which we can make sure in terms of doing our homework. A lot would then depend on the European Union and the member states, but the decade is to build these sustainable institutions, which have been taking centuries in some countries to build. So membership and development is not the equal things. It's only the beginning when Ukraine becomes a member of EU.
Can you perhaps also share with us if Ukraine have made its homework to get the negotiation framework? We already mentioned that there were 4 pre-requirements for that, but also how do you feel, because you also have to negotiate not only with the foreign partners, you negotiate with the parliament, with the government, you pass the messages from our EU colleagues on the recommendations. Do you feel the willingness and readiness to implement all of that is demanded?
Thank you so much. Indeed, we are working extremely hard to have the decisions this week. We have completed everything we have committed ourselves to in terms of the pending recommendations. And even today, in the morning, the Law Enforcement Committee of the Parliament has passed the last pending piece of legislation setting up the administrative responsibility for breaching the legislation on lobbying. This has been the one last thing. We have done a enormous job in terms of rearranging the whole narrative on protection of the rights of the national minorities, which is not the part of the discussion today, but this is a huge success story as I see it on my side. But this is only another accomplishment before a big step to be done. And indeed, I take it from my personal perspective that European process is the process of maturing, where we really have to understand that there is no easy solutions. There is always a multi-layer dialogue, multi-layer approach. There is always a consensus consensus which should be found between different positions, and I'm really happy to enjoy a brilliant engagement between EU partners, European partners, American partners, Ukrainian civil society, Ukrainian parliament, Ukrainian government. I can only recollect in my head one of the stories Anastasia knows. We had an extremely complicated process of ratifying the Istanbul Convention. It's not the anti-corruption, but I remember that one of the members of the parliament, who has been strongly religious person, has had tears in his eyes by pushing the green button in the parliament, because he knew that it is against something that he feels like, but he knew that there is a higher, more important things. And I think this is more important than any kind of small disruptions we can have throughout the way.
Thank you so much for your work and for sharing with us these insights. Mr. Kostin, first of all, congratulations of establishment the SAPO as a separate legal entity. I feel it's also a bit of a victory for you. Maybe it takes off a bit of work from your shoulders. But we also hear from Mr. Klemenko that cooperation is really great, and you do in your personally everything that you can to help smoothly establish SAPO as a separate entity. And this was one of the EU recommendations or EU demands to Ukraine as well. How you personally yourself assess the track record in investigation of top corruption cases that the EU also demanded Ukraine to improve, and the work of SAPO and NABO? We will have the leaders of this institution in the next panels reporting on their work, but you as the head of the prosecutorial service in Ukraine, it's important for us to hear what is your assessment.
Thank you so much, and thank you for organizing this very, very timely event and gathering all of us. And I think I just want to comment and echo all was said before me, starting from the greetings and in course of this panel. What I want first to admit that these successes we're discussing now are, first of all, the successes because of our policy of creating partnerships. This is very important. All of you mentioned this. So it's not only about networks, it's not only about support and cooperation. It's about creating real partnerships. Partnerships within our country, partnerships within our, which is very difficult, within our law enforcement agencies, partnerships between our law enforcement and civil society, partnerships within our, I would say, governmental institutions, starting from Parliament, Cabinet of Ministers, once again, law enforcement. And of course, our very open dialogue with all of our partners and friends abroad. Because the comments we have heard already today is a real evidence that we are open, we are committed, we do not stop, we are ready to improve, because we all understand that this is the steps we already have done. It's not the first steps actually. There are steps, there are another milestones we are passing in order to ensure that Ukrainian people will live in a country where not only the perception of corruption is lower, but become lower, but real life of real people will be a signal and an evidence that there is much less corruption in their normal life. And I really commend that we are not only discussing the importance of strength and further development of our specialized agencies like NABU, SAPO, High Anti-Corruption Court, NACP, who are dealing with the, maybe except the NACP, who is dealing with many cases, but the anti-corruption infrastructure in enforcement, who are dealing with fighting elite corruption. But it's extremely important also to fight all other levels of corruption, because I absolutely agree, people in their communities, for some of them, it doesn't matter about some minister or some judge somewhere. And they, of course, understand that this is important. But in their daily life, we also need to ensure that we are fighting corruption in their communities. It's local communities, like officers of law enforcement, officers of tax, customs, etc., etc. And we also are fighting the corruption. I would add it as a third element, or second before third, before petty corruption, this medium level. People who work in different agencies, in state enterprises for tens of years, and who, for many cases, they are not changed. And taking into account these 20, or I would say even more years, of their involvement in the illegal activities of so-called oligarchs, illegal activities of the organized crime. We all understand that we need to combat all of these layers of corruption at the same way, in parallel. Of course, during the war, we have not so much resources, but this is a matter of my priority as Prosecutor General, and all chairs of law enforcement agencies know that this is a priority for all law enforcement and security sector, to combat corruption from the very top to the very low level. And of course, I also would like to commend the comment that we need to invest more in prevention. And of course, the NACP, which I once again congratulate new chair of the head of the NACP, and I understand how many tasks are before you. While of course, within the partnerships we are creating, I hope and believe that with common joint efforts, we will succeed and we will improve the prevention layer as well. While prevention is not only NACP, it's also about a lot of regulations that should be changed. And in this way, as soon as we will start negotiation process, as soon as working streams will be created, we will have, I believe, very good progress in changing regulations in order to close the gaps in regulations which allow many others who still think that Ukraine live in a tradition when, for instance, so-called oligarchs can easily squeeze our economy from money using legal or quasi-legal instruments. I think that this is our unilateral position, and of course, with huge political will, with our commitment, I believe that we will succeed. And once again, you will all see the results of this joint work. Coming back to my personal assessment of the work of our anti-corruption institutions, I just want to commend head of NABU, head of SAPO for unprecedented work they are delivering, once again in a very difficult conditions. And they all know that they have my full support. And I just returned from Brussels and DC, and the same questions have been asked, and the same answer I have delivered to them. Because we all understand that only with joint efforts, our work will be more efficient. With joint efforts, our work will be more speedy. We will discuss, I think, later today what should be done in order to make our work more efficient and more speedy. Why I'm talking about time? Because you know that justice should be delivered in time. Otherwise, it's denied justice. And we now very explicitly feel it when we speak with the victims and survivors of war crimes. They really need justice. And what I explain in many instances, that you can't divide in your head your demand to justice, divide it that, okay, we demand justice for war crimes and atrocities committed, but we will wait for all other cases. We definitely have two enemies. External enemy, which is Russia and its proxies and collaborators, traitors, agents, and we have internal enemy, which is corruption. And we need to win in both fights. That's why I think that the institutions we have, making them stronger, improving them later, not only them, but regulations, and making partnerships. Maybe my colleagues later will explain how they work in collaboration with the other agencies. This is extremely important because, once again, it's make our work more efficient. And on the other way, it's once again about establishing trust. We all understand that there is no authority in Ukraine which is completely clean. We all understand. But we all understand that if we have commitment to clean, if we have commitment to fight against any instance of corruption or or embezzlement of budgetary funds, then we will step by step, we will get the result which is so necessary for Ukrainian people. It's not only about our European future, which I think is now the most important national idea of Ukrainians. We need to win in war. We all understand this. But coming back, looking at our future, we all understand that our future is to become full member of European family as soon as possible. This is our commitment, and we will proceed our job.
Thank you, Mr. Kostin. And I was thinking while listening to you that quite often in our event, especially held by the EU ECI, we mostly focus when talking about anti-corruption on NABU, SAPO, anti-corruption court, on this top-level corruption. And if you look into enlargement report, also most of the recommendations there related to pretrial investigation duration, single case consideration by one judges in high anti-corruption court, forensic expertise for the NABU, SAPO cases, they mostly target only anti-corruption institutions. But if we go on a street here on Hryshchatyk and ask people also how they will feel if the fight with corruption is moving on, it's also about their personal cases, personal experiences with different agencies like tax, customs, different services that they receive every day. And that's to a big extent it's not the mandate of the NABU and SAPO mostly. And you are in charge of this work, and I'm pleased to hear that you take it also as your own priority. What is, to your opinion, is missing? What is missing in your legislative framework that you're working with in your cases? What obstacles are still there that should be resolved?
I think we have a joint position with our anti-corruption authorities with regard to, I would say, making our work more efficient through changes and amendments to the, first of all, criminal procedural law. We all understand that, once again, I mentioned that justice should be delivered in time. And of course, we need to change some provisions in the criminal procedural code to make it more efficient. I will just take my notes. So first of all, I think that the discussion on further streamlining of the criminal legislation with regard to so-called laws of the amendments, it's an important discussion which we need to go ahead. And once again, it's not only about the cases of NABU. It's also about many other cases when we see that these problems are used to avoid accountability and to avoid responsibility in many other cases, where, for instance, it's about general criminality, but it's really the members of the organized criminal groups, and they really the lack of the accountability or avoidance, or how to say, when there is no accountability or no responsibility for these, of course it's paved the way for commission or for repetition of commission of these crimes, because coming back to our work, justice is always also about deterrence. So as more cases we will have and less mistakes we made, of course the potential other criminals will step aside. This is how system works in many countries. Then of course I think that the issue of the defense attorneys. Now, you know, the situation is that any person can have up to 5 defense attorneys, and if only one is not present, there is a possibility to postpone the case. We understand that this is not a balanced. Of course, you can have 5 attorneys, and being an attorney practically all of my life, I fully understand the right to defense, and this is constitutional right, and this is a right protected by many international obligations of Ukraine, and we will follow it, definitely. But maybe one attorney from 5 is enough to represent the defendant in court, because otherwise it is used, in some instances, it is used as an element how to postpone the case, and in some cases, when statute limitations are finishing, it also leads to impunity in specific cases. So I think that we also need to change this legislation. Of course, improving legal framework, regulating trials in absentia, in fully comply with the position and principles of the European Court on Human Rights. And once again, it's not only about cases of Nabu and Sapu. It also relates to our cases where Russian war criminals are found guilty in committing war crimes. So we are on the way of improving this legislation as well. The other important aspect is, of course, to regulate properly the use of plea agreements in corruption-related cases. We once again, we all know that trials could be long and costly process. And my full support is to arrange the extensive regulations on use of plea agreements as a matter of legal compromise. We know that the draft of the law is already prepared by the Ministry of Justice, and it's in line mainly with our vision. And I hope that the Parliament, I know that Anastasia is fully supporting this idea, and she knows that we have this discussion quite long. For me, as Prosecutor General, it's not only important to adopt this legislation as soon as possible. My vision is also to extend plea agreements to many other types of crimes. And I really want this legislation to be adopted sooner in order to, once again, to pilot it and maybe to improve something not only for cases of corruption, but also to explain our people that not in all cases it is possible to have a verdict of the court, but we can't miss the situation because we have not enough legal instruments. We can't miss the organizers of these crime schemes, which are once again not only involved in high-level corruption, but they also are involved in organized crime. They also are involved, and they're like proxies of so-called oligarchs. And we also need to use these instruments to go as higher as possible. So I hope that this discussion will follow to successful adoption of this legislation, where we are ready always to support our Parliament. Once again, want to commend the Parliament. We all know that how difficult is the situation there, but maybe in course of war, in the situation with so many difficult reforms that our Parliament has adopted, this is a historic step. Thank you.
Yes. I feel almost like Mr. Kostin already addressing some questions to Ms. Anastasia Radina, specifically for the list of legislative initiatives that he named. I know that plea bargain and the draft laws to prevent abuse of procedural rights by attorneys are already in the Ministry of Justice. They are preparing them to submit to the government. But are there any legislation prepared, the new drafts on the so-called Lozovay amendments, full cancellation, or any other initiatives that you personally perhaps working on?
Thank you very much, Irina. Colleagues, of course, I'm having a difficult task of saying something new and fresh after all the distinguished members of this panel, but I will be trying my best. Lozovay amendments. We definitely need to go further and to stop the practice of cases not even being tried in the court, regardless of the amount of evidence collected in the case. Because, for example, the case has been registered in the court 2 days after the term of pretrial investigation. That's just not acceptable. It is impossible to explain to people out there in the streets why such cases are not being tried. So this, of course, will be addressed in the Parliament, and I will probably, I think I can lift somehow the wheel of silence and tell you that it was just in the end of last week that we discussed the issue of how to proceed with this with the Minister of Justice. So I'm optimistic as to possibility of doing that. And I also actually want to take a minute to appreciate what has already been accomplished in the issue of cancelling Lozovay amendments. Half of that has already been addressed in the Parliament. So we just need to complete the task we already started and move forward with that. Same applies to the legislation on plea bargains. Again, I can lift this wheel of secrecy and say that it was in the summer of 2022 that at least 2 people sitting here in this panel and at least 1 person sitting there in the hall were together discussing the legislation on plea bargains. So we already have a solid legal drafting done to be able to move forward with that. In addition to that, as Olga Stefanishina already said, there is more to reform than just entering the just joining the EU. So in the Parliament, we're also working with a legislation on increasing transparency in construction procurement. The draft bill has just recently been registered in the Parliament that aims to introduce enhanced transparency in the pricing of construction procurement, so that we not only see the final price of a, for example, bridge or a school to be built, but we also see the breakdown of costs. This would be a vaccine of transparency that would prevent any possibility for inflated prices there. And this has been done quite voluntarily and by our own initiative. I think that shows a quite serious political will to move forward with reforms, whether they are part of the agenda of joining EU or not. Legislation on reforming the Bureau of Economic Security. Again, it was just at the end of last week that we discussed with the Minister of Justice how to proceed on that and how to take on board some recommendations that we received from our international partners and the business community. And again, I'm quite optimistic as to possibility to proceed with that in a timely way.
Thank you, Anastasia. And as you know, the next panel will be dedicated to the work of anti-corruption institutions, where they will share statistics about their results. And I remember you being quite critical during our last event, and specifically, I remember the phrase that anti-corruption institutions will never have enough resources, enough human power, enough finances, enough other resources to combat all of the corruption, right? To do all of the challenges that are there. And also with the financial situation that Ukraine is in at the moment, it's quite challenging to get additional resources for the institutions, as well with the number of people who left Ukraine during the last few years. So what would be your suggestion or recommendations how they can be more efficient, and what could be the response to that? Because let's be honest, we need to find a balance between the results that we want to achieve and the resources that we have for that.
Thank you very much for this question. First, it has to be outlined that despite dire financial situation, and I think we already are in a position to say that financial situation in Ukraine is dire, we still managed to find a full amount of money needed to fund the performance of anti-corruption institutions this year. We also raised the staffing cap for National Anti-Corruption Bureau, and it has already been agreed that by the moment that new competitions for additional staff for NABU end, we will see to the fact that NABU has additional financial resources to be able to basically pay salaries to these people. Same applies to the changes that are happening in Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office after they received a status of separate legal entity, which, by the way, was one of the huge reform accomplishments in the end of last year. At the same time, I'm still in a position that we need to address this issue with a drop of unpleasant realism. $37 billion is the amount of financial gap in the Ukrainian budget. Monthly salary of anti-corruption prosecutor, anti-corruption detective is roughly, just roughly, equal to salary of a soldier on the front lines. And it also equals to the cost of treatment of newly diagnosed child with leukemia in Kyiv Ohmedit Kids Hospital. Both the child and the soldier are fighting with their lives on the front lines in the hospital with the resources that we have. And I think it is very important for anti-corruption institutions to also fight as if they are on the front lines, on which they actually are, and not just count on an opportunity to extend their resources immediately. Because once again, $37 billion and the amount of money equal for the monthly salary of soldier, for monthly treatment of ill kids in the hospital.
Thank you, Anastasia. It's indeed true that the Parliament approved the increase of budget for funding the salaries. At the same time, I know from the partners that we work daily that they also have the issues of actually buying even simple laptops or tables for these new members or detectives or judges to come to and sit and work at. So it's almost like around 62 million hryvnias that the HAC will be missing for this year, and this money unlikely will be covered from the tranches that will come from the EU. So this is the questions I hope we also will discuss in the next panel. But now I would like to open the floor for the colleagues and experts in the room to raise their questions to our panelists. Please raise your hands, and my colleague in the white jacket will pass the microphone to you. And please introduce yourself while asking the questions. Yes, I see the question from Martyna Boguslavec.
Доброго дня, мене запитання буде.
So, good afternoon. I have a question to Andriy. I'm Martyna Boguslavec, the Executive Director for the Anti-Corruption Bureau of the Institute for Legislative Ideas. So we got back from a study tour with the Transparency International Program and Anti-Maidan, after Maidan, and the Euro Foundation on the 24th and 23rd chapter. And the public officials were asking us in Brussels when the plan for the adoption of the anti-corruption plan would be implemented. And it's not only the public officials in the Brussels who are asking this, also the Ukrainian society also is asking this, because by June 2024 there have to be the competition, the first one in Ukraine, for the leading positions in national police. 76% of the corrupt crimes are investigated by the national police, and 86% of all the crimes are investigated by the national police. 88% of the military crimes are investigated by the national police. And our question is the following: so are you going to have in this plan, before it's adopted, some transparent procedure, competition procedure that would attract international partners delegated into the competition boards on a similar procedure that we had with an ABU director, with an SK director that we saw in the procedure last week? It's very important for the civil society that we have this transparent procedure, and taking the representatives into the 76% of the police. Thank you very much for your question. So first of all, the work on the operational plan is taking place on a daily basis. And if you remember, the strategic plan itself was adopted in May, but practically it was completed in 1.5 months. That was December and January 2022, 2023. So I'm just saying how this work is organized. And it goes without saying that the operational plan is a much bigger document, and to make sure that we don't just adopt it, but to make sure that it's accepted also by our partners. First of all, on the level of the European Commission, as the plan that meets the requirements. And I'm looking at this as basically a draft of the future negotiation process when it comes to the items that you mentioned. So basically we're not losing time, but we are even accelerating this procedure. And this is exactly the task that I gave to the working group that's responsible for this process. So the plan is basically 95% agreed, and according to the procedure, if you remember, the president issued the decree that adopted the strategy, and then the cabinet of ministers has to adopt the operational plan. So the cabinet of ministers asked the general prosecutor's office, because we had a working group, to continue this work, and basically on its final stage, and basically I'm hoping I just don't want, just to exaggerate what's happening or just speeding up my forecast, but I'm hoping that within next week we'll be able to submit officially the draft operational plan to the Cabinet of Ministers in parallel, together with the institutions. So how do we call them? I mean, in the Cabinet of Ministers, yes, the agreement, yes, so COLs. So basically, this process of agreement is taking place when it comes to the procedure that you mentioned. So let us wait until we complete this process, and before it's submitted to the Cabinet of Ministers, I hope that we'll be able to communicate this. And in some institutions, basically, there are no open questions, and Anastasia mentioned the law on the Bureau of Economic Bureau, and basically it's the same procedure as for NABU, etc. So when it comes to other institutions, so let us have our final consultations next week, this week, and of course we'll communicate this, because in my point of view, of course, it's better to make sure that the people who are elected to these jobs, they have the trust, not only because they have a certain track record and some achievements, but to make sure that all the inspections are made, that basically all the candidates are exposed to all institutions. We know that it's a very complicated inspection procedure, for example, for the future candidate judges to the court, and even the detectives in NABU, and the same I hope will be in the Bureau for Economic Safety, and it's a very complicated procedure, but to make sure that those who are appointed, so first of all we have to check everything that was happening in their lives, basically, and it's not only to make sure that we have some guarantee that this person behaves ideally in the future, because no one can give this guarantee, because people are people. Unfortunately, there are some situations, but even to make sure that a person who is appointed, to make sure that no one could use, some secret story in his or her life in order to, let's say, blackmail this person with, some story that could create some mistrust in the future work. So this makes the institution stronger, when basically everything is known. It can be positive or negative information, can be any kind of information. We can evaluate this, because there are no ideal people, basically, or ideal people, to find them working in the high positions in the public office. It's really difficult, especially when we're talking a large number of people, but it's very important. And maybe this is a bit of a digression, but why this inspection is necessary? It's not only to choose the best one, but to render impossible, someone using these stories that weren't known before, so to prevent this blackmail. And again, this is the question to the independence of every person who will be working. So thank you very much for this question. And I just got back from Brussels, and they are aware of the progress when it comes to this track. It's not easy, because indeed this is very inter-institutional work, and it's very difficult to agree this with everyone. And then, of course, we have the parliament left, who has to adopt these laws, and this plan is for a couple of years. So we have to understand that the commitment that will be given by the Cabinet of Ministers, who agrees finally this operational plan, so this commitment will be followed by Ukraine as a state. So we are consulting also with the parliament to make sure that we understand, the temperature, to understand their vision in the parliament. So we're working in the open mode. So I hope that in March we'll submit this to the Cabinet of Ministers, and the official part is not going to take a very long time. Thank you. Thank you, Andriy. Do we have any questions
from the hall? I hope it's a signal that our partners are very well informed of the progress, and they have no questions, because they have a high level of trust to all the panelists and to anti-corruption institutions that are doing their job daily. So I want to invite you all then for the coffee break that will last for next half an hour, and we will have a pleasure to continue grateful discussion there. Thank you once more to all the panelists who took time today and for all of your daily efforts in rule of law and anti-corruption reforms. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Panel in a few minutes. I'm inviting everybody to join us in a big room. Колеги, прошу проходити, займати місця. Готуємося розпочинати другу панель нашого заходу. Водичку і каву можна брати з собою. Dear colleagues, please do not hesitate to take seats closer. We are also expecting our more colleagues to come back to the panel discussion, where the anti-corruption institutions will report on their achievements, but also will talk to the challenges that lay ahead. And I'm happy to pass the floor and the microphone to Andriy Borovik, the head of TI Ukraine. For us at the EU Anti-Corruption Initiative, it's extremely important that civil society is not only watchdogs and observers of the reform, but they are also active participants and active members of all discussions and panels. So Andriy, the floor and the audience is yours.
Well, so this panel is going to take place in Ukrainian.
Phones for translation, please get it because it will be in Ukrainian. Все. Чесно кажучи, коли побачив
Frankly speaking, when I see half of the audience left after the political part over, it looks like that majority of people are only interested in political issues, not the practical ones. Okay, well, hello. This is the second panel. Now we are going to discuss rather more practical issues, and we have a nice panel here. When I saw all the speakers on the agenda, I thought that this is a punishment panel, so to say, yeah, but except for the NACP, but you know, the society perceives it like that. We have Mr. Semen Kravanos, director of the NACB, Vera Mikhalenko, head of High Anti-Corruption Court, Alexander Klemenko, head of Specialized Anti-Corruption Office, and Viktor Pavlushik, head of National Agency on Corruption Prevention. Let's give them a round of applause. I thought, what should I say at the very beginning? First of all, maybe those who follow news on media, you've heard that in last 12 months we had more news on revealing acts of corruption and issues on investigation, and sometimes we hear such cases daily, and our society perceives them in different way. For people, news on detention of 3 MPs sometimes doesn't feel positively. It's sometimes perceived like, okay, we have corruption everywhere. So it will be interesting to hear from all the panelists, maybe briefly, up to 2-3 minutes, regarding your results, the results of your agencies. What results for 2023 do you have? Or maybe what would be your biggest achievements? Semen, let's start from you. Thank you very much for your question. When you say 3 MPs, you know, let's continue working on increasing this number or decreasing this number, I don't know, to change the perception. Well, that's not about the number, it's about the quality. It's very pity on one side because, well, it's very good that we have an opportunity to meet and to have everything what we have in place because we are very powerful in our cooperation between different law enforcement agencies who are able to conduct operations at such level and disclose the information on 4 judges or on few MPs or owners of construction companies. But on the other side, it's so pity that during the wartime, the corruption, which will be the second crime after the war crimes, on my thought, that we see such cases in effect. Actually, what do I like in my work that we actually are able to conduct the work at such level and that we demonstrate that there are no people who are untouched in our country, and I'm so happy with the cooperation with the specialized anti-corruption offices, and I'm very happy about the staff of anti-corruption bureau who are not afraid, and they can and they are able to perform effectively and to demonstrate good results. Talking about specific achievements, I'm very happy about all the achievements in 2023. I already mentioned the corruption in recovery field and catching judges and the judge of the higher Supreme Court and catching 3 deputy ministers, heads of public companies and enterprises. That list can be completed with much more numbers, and we have much more results comparing all previous years, and we have a lot of cases sent to the court. Well, this is a very diplomatic answer. Thank you, Alexandra. Specialized Anti-Corruption Office. How would you assess your efficiency? Of course, you are super effective, but let's assess your effectiveness. Thank you very much for your question. Do we see the results of our work? Yes, of course, we feel them, we see them. For us, the most important issue is the ensuring that all the crimes will be punished. We see that results are here. Majority of people who are the people responsible for crimes, they are caught, and they are actually a demonstration that the work of anti-corruption bodies has changed. It became of higher quality, and the most important, that these people are seeking for lawful measures to solve the issues regarding their responsibilities. So they are not seeking for some hidden ways or the way of resolving these problems. So they know that the institutions are active, effective, and for us it is very important, this feedback from corruptioners, that they actually assess our work, the one which became more just, and that it's not possible to give a bribe to our representatives. Vera, approximately a year ago, it was approximately 100 decisions in high anti-corruption court. Now we have more of them. Is it the main achievement for the last year, or do you have anything else? Well, we have a lot of indicators, in fact, but as to the judicial system, an indicator is not a very appropriate word, because the court cannot put some marks against some of indicators, because this is a process. The process cannot be speedy, it cannot be fast, it should be in due time. We are not following the idea to make the process fast or quick. We are trying to create an environment in which every proceeding in our court will be considered with due diligence. So we will hear all these sides, and I believe that 170 decisions for the period of our activity, taking into account the subjects brought to the liability and the subject of these decisions, is very subjective, and I don't want us to be assessed only with this number. I would say that the High Anti-Corruption Court is not a punishment body. This is actually the body which makes justice, delivers justice, and delivers justice among different subjects in our society. It cannot be quick, but it should be made properly. But, well, you talked about punishment. I thought you are going to talk about the justice. Okay. Victor, I think it's very difficult for you to talk about the results of the body you just became head of regarding the last year. So, okay, you have a long road ahead, and you still have to learn a lot about your body. But again, I have a question to you as a head of the national agency, and please tell us, what do you think about the results for the last year? Thank you very much for your warm words and for your congratulations regarding my appointment. This is my first public event, and today is only 14th day after my appointment, and I'd like to know that, yes, the team was ready to provide all the information to me, all the results. They gave all that information to me, but it is important to know that during these 14 days, I received a lot of information. I received information on specific results of our team, and if before I could assess the activities of this agency only from the external point of view, today, having some information already, I can now relate to that from the internal point of view. And talking about the results, I'd like to mention the following. I can reflect my own feelings and what do I see, but I wouldn't comment numbers, because these are the numbers which were provided by the team of the body which I wasn't last year. So the last year, we have to remember the main issues which changed last year. Restoring the declaration process, restoring the checking the declarations process, and these amendments were made last year. Also, it was mentioned that these bodies should not be treated as punishing bodies. I will help with that. We also have to think about other victories, taking into account during the long period of declaration process. NACP was working on monitoring of lifestyle, conflict of interest, and risk detection. These are the main factors which were performed duly by NACP team, and they brought some results, as you can see. Well, in fact, I had another question to you individually, but now I have one more general question, because I see that this is the major issue for all of you, and these are the resources. These are not the money. As we heard from Anastasia Radina, there is a gap for 37 billion hryvnias in the budget, but this is rather about people. I have the following question to you, but with some specificity. Victor, you mentioned that the declaration process was restored, and that there is like 2 million declarations for 2 years, right? Reports of political parties. Do you have the resource in your agency to process this volume of information properly and not to lose time? So do you have enough people, resources, tools? First of all, I would like to say these are 3 years, not 2, because part of the declaration for 2023 are already there. This is more than 500,000 declarations which have been already filed to the system. Till 1st of April, we will receive also thousands of declarations which are going to be submitted for 2023. As of now, we have the following key challenges, and they are regarding the possibility of redistribution of resources and targeting at fulfilling all the tasks set by the legislation. And as of now, we have a lot of specialized checks, more than 10,000 checks which were resumed just recently. So what can I say here? I believe that some aspects, some priorities which I set against me will allow us to optimize the processes. And to give you an example, the processes which are already active in NACP, and this is actually an automation of processes, and I believe that for the future we should reach the pre-filling of declarations, because and automated filling of some declarations. So this is not just to press one button and receive all the information on income and property, but I see it as a process which will simplify the submission of declaration, and for the agency it will make the process of their checking and analysis much simpler, so the state would not do the checking of the data which is already in state registries. Vera, now you receive the packages from the candidates to judges position. What do you think? Will you be able to fill in all the vacancies? And another question is, what is needed to make courts more efficient? As regards to the competition, I truly believe that we will be able to fill in all the vacancies, and I wish it not just to be the process for the process. I wish these people to be the best of the best to fill in these vacancies. Of course, we face some challenges as of the moment, because before we started receiving the documents, we have two competitions. The first one for the courts of the first instance, the fourth round of the selection, and also another one, the competition of the judges to the appellate courts. And many, if we talk about the appellate courts competition, just recently 1,770 candidates were approved for further stage. So I thought that from the very first day of opening these vacancies, we will have a lot of people to apply, but we don't have them too much now. And sometimes it happens in our country that people usually file submissions the last day. So I believe that all the candidates, especially eligible ones, they will file their applications as soon as possible, or maybe at the last day, and I hope that we will be able to select very professional colleagues. What else do we need? There is a question of human factor. When the competition is over and when the number of judges will be increased, we will obviously will need to organize a competition for additional personnel, because there is a need in secretaries and other technical staff who will need to perform many functions. And as of today, we still have an issue with the premises. We are trying to deal with it step by step. It's not the issue for the discussion at this event, but talking about the efficiency, my colleagues will agree with me that some legislative amendments would be useful too. And first of all, that is the amendments on abuse in procedural rights, and there are also specific legislative initiatives on one judge consideration of cases. Alexander, I have a question to you as well. This is also an issue about resources. So the legislation was changed, operative independence was amended, and do you feel these amendments already, or they are in the progress of accommodation? Actually, these amendments are in the process of finalizations. The separate legal entity is being created. The main task is to ensure the proper transition of the court from the previous legal form to the new one. As to the resources, we have enough resources now. We have even some extra resources saved, but since the number of judges will be increased and number of detectives will be increased, and that will impact our need in the resources. So should we have increase of the judges, of course we will have more trials in courts, and a prosecutor from our office will have to attend such trials. So due to this, we will have more prosecutors, and that will of course cause additional need in staff, but as of now the situation is under control, and I hope that it will be okay for us to run smoothly. I'd like to hear your thought. During the last competition for prosecutors, you managed to fill in only 4 positions out of 8. We know the forecast 300 of detectives and one at some day, but not now. But as of now, what is your okay? Having the information, how many judges you are going to have, how many trials you are going to have, it's understandable. But as of now, this is a huge challenge. Who should be a challenge? Who should come to these places? I understand that all these agencies, anti-corruption agencies, cannot lower their level, their expectations. It is necessary to preserve these expectations, level of expectations. Maybe you have some creative ideas. How can you overcome this?
Yes, we also noticed the number of the candidates who submit their applications to the agency is decreased, and first of all, the salary of the prosecutors was reduced, and basically it's the same as with the salary of the prosecutor with the General Prosecutor's Office, and the burden and the workload is the highest in the system. So the number of those who want, the number of candidates of the specialized anti-corruption office was basically reduced constantly, but the situation has now improved due to the most recent decisions, and the number of the candidates to the new jobs in the specialized anti-corruption prosecutor's office will be increased. And of course we can't make the demands less rigorous, because the staff is the key, and of course we're not going to bring down the requirements, and depending on the number of candidates, basically I don't think it's going to be the key problem for our institution, because we have a certain stock in reserve, and additionally we mobilized 10 prosecutors who also basically are the reserve that we're going to use after they're demobilized. Thank you, Semen. So plus 100 detectives this year. That's the plan. So is everything ready for that? Well, the legislation is ready, payroll is ready, and these jobs have been distributed between the departments. And the first one, the first question is the salary, the funding for the salary, the additional premises, and now we have a number of proposals that we're looking into where to have, these premises for the additional staff. And the most important thing, just like my colleague said, is finding people with high levels of motivation and professionals with a high level of transparency. And this is the biggest challenge for me and for the whole team of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. And our international partners really help us, the EU Anti-Corruption Initiative, and they help us to study the situation and how to improve the climate inside the team, how to develop the human potential, and how we can attract new staff. And we're working together on the communication campaign to make sure that we attract as many candidates as possible for this competition. And also we have partners from the US Embassy who are helping us, and we are closely working on the programs of developing the personnel and additional staffing. And before this additional competition was announced, we changed the competition procedure. We added another stage of checking the integrity for all the detectives, potential candidates, and For the management positions in the detectives departments, we will have an additional interview for the integrity, and we will have this interview online. And also civil society organizations, NGOs, the watchdogs and anti-corruption NGOs. So from the moment of the initiation of the integrity assessment of the candidate can send a notification about a candidate, and these notifications have to be reviewed by the committee. So this is where we are now. Another challenge we're facing with is the special inspection. So that's a wonderful mechanism, but with all due respect to this tool, so the internal inspection department again checks very well, but then we spend 6 weeks and up to 2 months just to check with the sending the paper-based documents. And there are some objective reasons for that, like there's only one person who is responsible for checking one specific document in the Excel spreadsheet, so that person in that institution just can't process that much information so quickly. So we're trying on improving this, and for 6 months we have this additional competition, the checking the integrity, their background, and finding the highly motivated professional first, and then you have a special inspection for 2 months. So for NABU, this it means we're spending a lot of time on something that our internal inspection office is coping with perfectly well. So staffing is the priority for 2024, and we pay a lot of attention to this, and we are creating an environment which is favorable for the staff. So recently, with the help of the European Anti-Corruption Initiative, we opened a childcare room, and this is very helpful for our staff who have small children. So all taken together, this needs to create an environment where a detective who works under extremely difficult conditions and where they have to carry out the pre-trial investigation in very challenging circumstances, so they have to understand that they have a good climate in the team and there are all the resources to make sure that they achieve their goal. Saman, another question to you. So you are helping basically me, and you use the word priority in 2024. So this year, hopefully, there will be an independent NABU audit, if I am not mistaken, by September 2024. It's supposed to happen. And last year, the partners have already conducted an audit, a bit of a different kind of audit. And the results were published in October. It's been 4 or 5 months since then. So the question is the following. So which of the challenges that were noted in the audit report have been addressed or are being addressed by NABU, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation when we have another audit and basically it just repeats at least partially something that was said in October. And then we have a logical question, like, what have you been doing for the past 9 months? So do you have have you taken some steps or some plans to address the results of the previous audit, and what is the status quo now? So I'll be happy to answer this question. So over 150 recommendations were provided in the technical assessment. So that's how we call it. Yes, that's the audit. That's the technical assessment of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. And we received more than 150 recommendations, about 35% of that list. And this is, when it comes to the recommendations that require, some changes to the legislation. So something which lies outside of NABU, like the integration into the joint decisions between the with other anti-corruption agencies. So the first thing we did, we developed the implementation plan for these recommendations. So more than 450 events, and 60% from this plan is being initiated and it's being implemented. About 7-8 recommendations, substantial recommendations, not even events but recommendations, are considered as completed. So we have more staff. For example, we changed the structure of certain departments, and we have additional funding. We increased starting from 2024. So for the first time over the past 4 years, the Ministry of Finance, notwithstanding this dire financial situation, it envisaged capital funding. So for the first time in 4 years, we can do that without the assistance of our partners who have been helping us all this time. We can finally, buy computers for ourselves. I'm very happy about it. And now we ask for some additional requests for funding 100 people. I hope that they won't tell us like we gave you, the funding. So I hope that we have constructive cooperation with the Ministry of Finance, and I hope that we'll get the additional funding for these 100 people for 2024, and basically that's the way it is now. Yes. And yeah, that's a very broad question. You can talk a lot about that. Yeah, maybe there will be some additional questions from the audience, of course. Alexander, so the question is, as to prosecutors. So what else is missing in the procedural capacities to make sure that Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office is more efficient and is 100% happy with all the tools? So what else is missing? So we can talk about Lozovo's amendments. Yes, during the previous panel, it was mentioned that everyone thinks that they have to be cancelled because, well, first and foremost, that's responsibility. The prosecutor's responsibility who made a decision to notify about the suspicion, but there's no basically capacity to complete the pre-trial investigation because the court sitting is coming. So if we remove this mechanism in the criminal procedural code, that the court is responsible for continuing the timeline of the investigation after the suspicion has been notified of. So basically we need to have a person who's responsible for the pre-trial investigation, for collecting the evidence, for submitting the case to the court, or taking another decision envisaged by the criminal procedural code. So this is priority number one for us, because we have examples when we started the investigation, we were planning some investigation efforts, and we had the plans to continue with documenting the crimes, but the court refused us to extend the time and the motivation. I won't comment on the motivation, but just the fact that we had to send the case to the court without, bringing to the responsibility the persons for whom we had already collected the evidence, and these are the highest-ranking officials in the whole scheme. So, thanks to this mechanism, basically, those persons basically managed to escape, criminal responsibility and being prosecuted under the criminal law for this given crime. Another element that we believe that has to be added is to improve the institution of agreements, because this is an efficient mechanism for disclosing, exposing corruption schemes where the organizers of the crime do not leave any traces, they do not sign any documents, they only provide orders to these other persons. So the agreement mechanism and having this about with other persons who are responsible basically will bring in another mechanism for prosecuting those higher ranking officials. And in many cases we're talking that someone is ready to have this bargain and have this deal with the prosecutor to disclose all the higher ranking officials, but the prosecutor cannot offer them any kind of punishment envisaged by the law, but according to our criminal code, so the crimes that they're convicted of is 5 or 7 years of prison. So if someone is ready to receive 3 or 4, even sometimes 5 years of prison, we can't offer this to this person, notwithstanding the fact that this bargain is very attractive for us because it allows us to document some higher ranking officials who commit those crimes. So that's the second question. And the third question is improving, well, not improving, but I'd say like when they were adopting the law in December, they were adopting the law on improving the criminal procedural legislation and amending the law of Ukraine on prosecutor's office. So they overlooked a number of issues that we were, drawing the attention to, but the Verkhovna Rada, hastily adopting this law, it did not make the necessary amendments about the investigation operative activities, where basically it's about the monitoring of the prosecutors over the investigation, and the SAC as the independent institution, and on all this supervision will be done only by one person, who is the leader of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, because they don't have he doesn't have the possibility, or she doesn't have the possibility, to delegate this to other prosecutors. So that's a gap, and we need to make the necessary amendments, and basically we need to add the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office here. But these are some details that basically will complicate the efforts in this area. And what do the MPs say basically about that, about the third priority? So we do not talk to the MPs, directly, but when they ask us about, some recommendation and which legislation needs to be amended. So basically, we send the information about what needs to be amendment and to which norms have to be amendment. So now we are in touch with the Ministry of Justice when it comes to the draft law and improving the institution of bargains, and maybe that's where we could include this amendment, and also amend the law on the operative investigation activities. And also we are cooperating to make sure that we improve the mechanisms for interaction between NABU and SAP with other jurisdictions. So basically to make sure that we give the mandate to the leader of SAP to send the extradition requests, and basically that's what prevented us from sending the extradition requests from 2016 until 2022, when the Prosecutor General was replaced. So our requests were blocked and they were lying in the General Prosecutor's Office, and we couldn't do anything about that. And it's not about the extraditions only, and this mandate basically it helps to have the international investigation too, and only the person who can send the request for extradition also can basically have a red warrant in the Interpol placed. So basically this is a critical issue to make sure that we have it spelled out in legislation, so that NABU and SAP have certain independence and do not depend on the General Prosecutor's Office. And also this is about the joint investigation teams, international teams. That's a very efficient tool. And currently, like everybody knows, that corruption has this transnational character, and none of our investigation stops only in Ukraine, and we always basically move beyond Ukraine. So having, this joint investigation team based on the decision of the sub-leader, not the Prosecutor General, would ensure some independence of our investigation when we talk about bribery abroad. So we also attract the General Prosecutor's Office, who basically give the permission to create a common joint investigation team, and only after that the prosecutors from SAP and the detectives and prosecutors from other countries start to document this crime, and it increases the number of the people who are aware of our investigation, which is supposed to be confidential, and it also increases the risks of information leakage. So we are working on improving this mechanism as well. Thank you. So Vera, we also have a similar question to you, Victor. So basically during the pre-trial investigation, there are some challenges. So what are the challenges that would be nice to address, and something that basically prevents you from looking into cases in a more efficient way? So basically, if we look at the drawbacks in the legislation, there are things like that, because there are drawbacks in the legislation, and the colleagues have mentioned a number of them. That's their perspective on these drawbacks, and in the context of saying that what we are faced with during the pre-trial investigation. So I mentioned pre-trial sitting. So the individual review of the criminal proceedings would really speed up the sitting and of those crimes where the punishment is less than 10 years. So basically this is basically extending the general rules of the criminal proceedings to the High Anti-Corruption Court. So the concept of the High Anti-Corruption Court is about, the collegial review of all the cases, but in the real time, when in one college, in one board, in one panel, we have judges who are in different premises and who have their own schedules of basically having these board meetings. So we have logistical problems, of having these joint meetings, and we have other challenges, for example, like declarations with which are not true, and basically why we have these mistakes in the declarations, conscious mistakes, and basically they are sent a few months before the expiration term, and then we try, like the three judges in one board, they try to agree their schedules, and basically a certain number of cases remain not reviewed. So basically we're talking about the general rules of reviewing the criminal proceedings cases, so that would really speed up this process. Also, we have the meetings that we have in the High Anti-Corruption Court, and we have not, let's put it like very conscientious attitude when it comes to the defenders, and the abuse of the procedural rules is open to discussion, because the attorneys say that it's not even an issue of abusing the procedural rights, but we are all observing that when using like legal mechanisms, the case can be well, if not blocked completely, it can be protracted for a very long time, and the judges do not have some legislative mechanisms to make sure they can do something about the situation. And I believe, to make sure that we carry on with the court settings, these two case priorities are the most important ones. So, Victor, it'd be nice to listen to your opinion. So you said that, like, the 14th day, yes, in the office, it's very little time basically to really dive deep into everything, but maybe for the next 6 months you have some top 3 priorities as the head of your agency. So what results would you like to see in 6 months, and during the next event like this, you would say we did this, this, and this?
First of all, for myself, I see a key perspective as human resources, people. Well, this is 14th day already. This is already a lot, where at the same time it's not much, but at the same time I see that people are doing their job. I'm as a person who in half a year, in 1, 2, 3 years will be responsible for the decision taken, and considering my visions which will be implemented, that will be all in line, the analysis, personal analysis of the information which I will obtain. First of all, I see my task to preserve the team, to preserve the human resource which is there in the agency, and this resource should continue working. As Howard Schultz said, he said that success is nothing when you come to the finish alone. My second priority, maybe not for the 6 months, maybe for longer, is an automation of processes. I has already mentioned that answering your previous question. I will not talk more about that. And the third task, it will be not for 6 months again, but this is because we faced huge challenges in our work. We have 3 years of declarations. We have a large volume of information, a large number of reports from political parties. We have a colossal amount of information. So the resource for the nearest half of a year will be spent and will be invested into this type of work, into the work of analyzing this information. As regards to strategic planning, we believe that we are going to work on implementing this straight anti-corruption program, and we will try to reach a better score in the corruption perception score. Also, I see the task to reveal risks of possible corruption in different fields like medical commissions, procurement, and these are only few areas which can and should be covered. These are key priorities, but as to future tasks, they will be elaborated further, but this is for the perspective in general. Thank you, friends. There is an opportunity to put questions from the hall, from the audience, if there are any. Yes, please. Yes, please, welcome. You're welcome. Thank you very much. May I ask a question to two speakers, one by one? Okay. You are the first one. Go. I'm from LigaNet journal. Igor, the first question will be to you. You mentioned that you have identified the tasks for you, and you haven't mentioned the sponsors of war issue, because we had quite a scandal about that, because there were Greek companies last year and they were excluded from the list of sanctioned companies, then included their back, and now the state operator of the REA said that they will look into the list of such companies when they will choose respective suppliers for their procurements. So this list of sanctioned companies is actually very important. The list of sponsors of the war. What is your opinion about that? What is the fate of this list? What do you think about it? Thank you very much for the question. Yes, this is a very important and complicated issue at this stage. You've mentioned everything correctly, that your accents are correct, what it entails, inclusion to this list from positive side and from the negative side. These are important elements, and I am sure that in assessing this issue, yes, I'm only the 14th day at work and I only understand some points, but this is not enough to have a thorough understanding of the problematic. But of course, this issue requires the regulation. It should be regulated, and this process in any case entails the communication not only within the ACP, it's in communication with different agencies and legislators, so it should be regulated in any case, and further on it can be used as a basis for further decision making. Semen, I have the question to you now. You are dealing with the case of Dmytro Senichenko, reformer. He has a number of criminal cases. What is the stage of investigating these cases? You may not answer this question if you don't want to, because this may be not your specialization. There were stories that Unified Coal Company supplied coal to Russia till 2022. Have you checked this issue? Could it be in reality? Pre-trial investigation is ongoing. This is the only thing I cannot tell you. I'm sorry, I cannot provide any more information. I already have actually a joke about that. We have a circle of suspected persons. We are working on establishment of all persons involved into this crime group, and we are establishing facts and circumstances and the ways how and by which ways the public and enterprises products were realized. Mr. Koshelenko is now working in his Ministry of Social Policy, this Deputy Minister. Have you checked him? Because he worked with Senichenko and now he works in the Ministry of Social Policy. Have you checked him? As of now, the circle of suspected persons is the one which was already communicated by our agency, and we cannot name them, but we check the involvement of all possible suspected persons, the owners of private companies, the workers of law enforcement agencies, and so on and so on. I will not say any names and surnames now, but the work is ongoing. I will give a very, very brief comment. Yeah, of course, I know that you are very interested in all the details, but they will provide you only this very short answer, because they will not disclose anymore. expert from the Center of Political Reforms. I have a question to the head of an ACP. Just recently, Verkhovna Rada has adopted the law on lobbying, and this law extends the functionality of the national agency to this particular field, and this law gives you powers to establish breaches in the field of lobbying of public entities. And also now we know that there are amendments pending to the administration code. I have a question to you. What is, in your opinion, the implementation of this law, considering all its provisions and risks which the civil society has raised for many times already, and how do you plan to increase or to supplement competencies to anti-corruption commissioners for the implementation of this law? Thank you for the question, first of all. I'm sorry, the question will not be too extended. After the law is signed, an ACP will have more work. These are the challenges we mentioned earlier. The register of lobbying subjects is an additional workload for our agency. That is the issue I've mentioned regarding our challenges for 1.5 years. As to the powers of anti-corruption commissioners in existing conditions, I think that we will face with many more challenges. We will have much more challenges in the future because the law itself is not detailed properly. The provisions which included into state anti-corruption program, they are also not very clear. Sometimes they require a comprehensive approach taking into account the perspectives of existing resources and the ability of these resources and capacity of these resources to perform their functions. Friends, do we have more questions? It looks like everything is clear. You see how nicely our anti-corruption bodies communicate. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being with us, and thanks to the organizers, to the UACI for this event.